Welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me again, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And Andrew, we're here for the final installment of the Carolina football podcast we've been doing. If you've missed the first three, make sure you go check those out. We talked about the seniors that are returning and the offense and defense. So when you're done watching this video, click on our channel below and you'll see those up somewhere on our channel. So make sure you go check those out if you haven't already. AJ, this one's just going to kind of be program as a whole, big picture. We're not really going to dive into the position groups and stuff and talk a lot of X's and O's like we did in the previous ones. This was going to be kind of just where the programs are now compared to, where they've been and kind of the steps they've taken and where they're trying to go as well. But the first thing I kind of want to talk about, Mack Brown took the job in November 2018. Seems like a long time ago. It really wasn't. A lot of doubters, a lot of people. I mean, I did it, and we did a previous podcast not too long ago, and we kind of talked about this a little bit. And I actually went back and looked at some of the old news articles that were written by a lot of outlets when Mack Brown was hired, and kind of threw the headlines in the video. Can't remember what podcast it was, but there was a lot of naysayers, a lot of guys like, why the heck are they hiring this guy? This isn't going to work.
Do you remember the one that I wrote?
What did you write about? I'm trying to remember.
I kind of fed off those. They were all saying that, it never works when a guy goes back, old, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I wrote, if there is a time where this can work, this will work, this is it. Mm-hmm. Because of, I don't want to go into that or anything like that, but go ahead. I didn't want to.
No, you're good. You're good. I knew you.
Like I knew 5 times in these 4 videos, I've cut you off.
Exactly, you're good, man. I knew you weren't aware of the naysayers when I was looking back, because I think I knew you wrote something kind of opposite of that. Like, if it's going to work now, this is the time to do it. So
it's never going to work. This was it. And we've seen why. And we'll hit on that during the course of this podcast, because it's still an ongoing process. It's not like, hey, Orange Bowl's the pinnacle. He did his job. He can now go on and have a Kool-Aid and gold watch party and everybody can celebrate. No, this thing's still going on.
Yeah.
I've flown a lot lately, and the plane is still going this way.
Still taking off. It's on upward trajectory, to say the least, for sure.
Yes.
The first thing
The
first thing I kind of want to ask you about, AJ, and kind of just get your opinion on it, and kind of put you on the spot because I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this for the video. But when Mack Brown was hired, obviously you weren't really one of those naysayers that was kind of just like, before he even got the job, saying it's not going to work. They might, just no way it's going to happen. Looking from November 18 to now, so just over 2 years since then, where Carolina's been, what they've been able to do, obviously 8-4 this year, Orange Bowl berth, finishing off with a big win over Miami, the trajectory and the hype around this program, for lack of a better word, is probably as high as it's been in a long, long time. Are you at all, is Mack kind of exceeded expectations on when he was hired during that press conference, what you thought he was going to be maybe 2 years down the line, or is it where you expected? What are your kind of thoughts on where the program's at now in terms of what your expectations were, 2 years ago?
He's been very open the last month, especially since Miami, is saying yes. Mm-hmm. They're further along than he thought. Yeah. And I don't know. And his expectations about where they belong are far more important and have far more credibility than mine. Mm-hmm. So yes, and yes, I agree with all of that. I think that, and I asked him last week, a few days ago, when we talked to him, where that evolution point was, if there was one.
That was a good question.
Okay, here's the moment things kind of shifted forward. And he went back to the Florida State game. Yeah. And we talked that week about how that may have been too fast.
Yeah, I think it was.
None of us predicted them to lose in Tallahassee, but they weren't the number 5 team. Sure didn't look like it to me on the field, and there were other factors at why they were. But what is the thing that we talked about, the importance of this year? Later on, when people started saying, man, they should never have lost to Tallahassee, never should have lost to Virginia. And I kept saying, yes, they should have, because that's who they were on those nights. Mm-hmm. And that was part of their process. This program made huge strides this year because the program and all the parts inside of it learned how to learn. Mm-hmm. Last year, they just felt better. The staff got them to feel better about themselves. They tasted victory. They started figuring out, we can win games. We've got a nice future ahead of us. This year, they learned how to win. They learned how to learn. They learned how to look in the mirror and say, here's where we really screwed up in this game. Yeah. And we can't do that anymore. And every once in a while, you need a second reminder. And that second reminder was Charlottesville. So they lost those games. That right now, I don't think they would lose those games.
I don't think so either.
But they lost them when they did because they were supposed to, and it was part of their process. Now, they're still in the process, but when they reached the Miami game, we said, now it's time to judge them. The process has to become a product at some point. And the process became a product, and wow, that was really impressive. So then you judge them on the level playing field with Texas A&M and the Orange Bowl, and it's like, okay, they got some parts that are missing. They got some kids that are going to be a part of next year's team, and they actually acquitted themselves quite well. So I think that they are further ahead, because I don't think anybody could have imagined that they would play Notre Dame as mentally and physically tough as they did for 4 quarters. I don't think people would have thought that 6 months ago. And then after seeing the way way their season went, that they would have been toe-to-toe with Texas A&M, and they were. So absolutely, the program is further ahead, and it's in really good shape because they're bringing in Jimmys and Joes. And some of them just got to Carolina back in. When I say here, because we were in Chapel Hill all the time, got to Carolina, last spring, last summer, last January, I guess, but they didn't get to do much. They got a lot more coming in January 16th and a few more coming in the summer. This thing is it's in excellent shape. Mack is getting it done. I see no reason to expect the program to take a step backwards. I think they're going to be all forward steps moving forward, perhaps even after Sam leaves. So you can't find much to criticize right now. What Mack is doing has been phenomenal. He's got an excellent staff. From everything I understand is there's great communication on the staff. Mack trusts his assistants. He has very high standards, very high expectations, but he trusts them to do the job. And that helps them grow. They're not suffocated in that sense, so they're allowed to grow. And people that are critical of Phil Longo, I think we've seen some growth from Phil Longo. All of us grow. I'm still growing in my job, and I've been doing this for 25 years. So Phil Longo is going to grow in his, Jay Bateman's going to grow in his, and Mack Brown's going to grow in his. The minute he stops growing is when the program plateaus. And right now, I don't see it plateauing anytime soon.
Absolutely. Let's kind of switch the focus. We talked about the process so much this season. You kind of hit on it there in terms of Carolina probably wasn't ready. They weren't the number 5 team in the country. I mean, Mack Brown said it. I mean, he wasn't like he was out here lying to his team. I mean, he literally pretty much told them, you guys are, there's not a lot of conferences not playing right now. Maybe where the playing field's at, you might be in the rankings, but overall, you're not ready for that yet. And we saw that against Florida State. We kind of saw that against Virginia. But let's kind of switch the focus to the end of the season because, like you mentioned, that Notre Dame game, I think, was okay, we can compete with these guys. We didn't win the game when there's no moral victories, which Mack Brown said millions of times, but we competed with Notre Dame for, 3 quarters, for almost 3.5 quarters. And, Notre Dame turned it on late and ended up winning the game. But then you go over to playing the top 10 team of Miami. Carolina looked really good against them. I mean, that was one of the best Carolina performances I've seen in my lifetime overall. And then you kind of switch to the Orange Bowl where Carolina hangs around and, for most of that game is in it. We talked about it. I thought Carolina was, the better team for at least 3 quarters of that game. And in the end, I think ended up getting a little worn down by defensively in terms of what A&M was able to do with bringing in fresh legs and guys that were, the second team's just as big as the first team. So, but let's kind of switch that focus to the end of the year. Mack Brown said that the expectations of this program now are to compete with those teams. Are to be those teams, or to be, you play in the Orange Bowl once, you want to be back there again. It's not to just get there. That's the pinnacle, come back down to earth and just, be average again. Max said that the stated mission of this program is to get to that point and stay there. How close do you think they are to being able to do that, AJ? You think this is as good as an opportunity as we've seen since, Mack Brown was here the first time?
Well, I think 2010, if it didn't have all the issues with guys not being able to play, and especially early, I think that team was built to make a big-time national push.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think I'll tell you what, I think Notre Dame being in the ACC was a blessing this year because Carolina wouldn't have played them otherwise.
Exactly.
It would, even with everything that happened with COVID, let's say Notre Dame figured out a way to put together an independent schedule, and they didn't play an ACC schedule. Carolina had someone else that day, and it would have been a Notre Dame, and because of that, they wouldn't have had that amazing lab experiment.
Exactly.
Remember, I called these games when you're building sort of a lab experiment. You get to see what you got.
Mhm.
get to see what you're all about. And Notre Dame provided them that opportunity. Then they got a chance to regroup 2 weeks later, going to Miami and had another game to see what you got.
Mhm.
And they saw they got a lot. And I
Mhm.
think what they saw was that they're the program in the Coastal. Like, that's theirs for the taking right now. Miami's going to be a threat, but they're certainly ahead of Miami. There's no doubt about that. So what's next on the target list is Clemson in the championship game on the other side of the conference. Then you get to go play A&M in the Orange Bowl, another see what you got game, especially with the opt-outs. I said before that game that long term, this is the best thing for Carolina.
Mhm.
I'm not sure there's no guarantee they would have beaten A&M with those guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's done is done. Now that the season is in the books, how grateful is the staff? And should Carolina fans be that Eugene Asante got 61 snaps in that game?
Man. Mm-hmm.
How about Josh Downs getting those 2 touchdowns? He's got a whole off season riding on that now.
Mm-hmm.
How about Joffrey Brown being more a part of things? They got to see the offensive line block for guys not named Carter and Williams. They got to see how Sam handled RPOs when they maybe wanted him to run a little bit more. They got to learn a lot. It was another lab experiment with a ton of intel. So those 3 of those last 4 games, they played top 10 teams, and they got an opportunity to just find out everything they need to know about the program and about the group that's coming back. And it's so much better off than had they played another ACC team or some crappy non-conference team instead of Notre Dame, and whatever, let's say they didn't get to play A&M in a bowl game. Let's say it was somebody. Let's say somebody else in the league would have been in there. I don't know. The whole point is that they got to play those games, and it's going to benefit them a ton because they know the staff can sit in a room right now, and the questions that they have are, okay, can some of these guys do it with more snaps? Can some of the new guys coming in help out? What roles will they fill in? Are we going to have 7 or 8 offensive linemen next year instead of 6? That kind of thing. But with the dudes that are playing, they know what they're all about, and that's very valuable information. And I think what they learned were very positive things. This program is absolutely heading in the right direction, and it's sped up because they had those opportunities to have those measuring stick games.
Yeah. Final thing I want to talk about, AJ, before we close this thing out. We talk about it all the time. You talk about it a ton. Going into next season, from a journalistic standpoint, from your standpoint, you always talk about covering a team's stated mission. It seems like this team's stated mission now is to be one of the top teams in the country, and not only that, to be in the ACC championship game. For you going into next year, if everything, no injuries in the offseason, no big injuries or no big losses, and if this team is what it is right now going into next season, is it ACC championship game? Maybe you don't win it because you're still playing a really good Clemson team who's been there and done it for 6 years in a row now they've won it. Is it ACC championship game or bust for this program next year? Is it a failure if this team doesn't get there based on what they've kind of said and what Mack Brown said is what this team is and program is trying to get to?
I don't like to use the word failure with college athletics.
I know it's a good point. Good point.
Because who determines that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we, who have nothing to do with the growth of the program, place such high expectations on them and they don't meet our expectations, then we call them failures.
Exactly.
I don't buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I understand that. I think the standard that's set within the program, they'll determine whether or not they met those expectations. Mm-hmm. The stated mission, though, I judge programs and teams on their stated mission because they have established that as the line.
Yes, the culture.
Okay, and they've got to start the season wherever they start it, and they got to get to that line. Mm-hmm. That's what they want to be. Occasionally, teams will give a stated mission that's
unrealistic.
That's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, I'm not going to give any examples, but I've covered some basketball teams. And they say, "Oh yeah, we're going to the Final Four." No, you're not. So I'm not going to judge on that. But if it's realistic stated mission, I absolutely hold them to that standard. Mm-hmm. When I cover them. And I don't yet know what this team's stated mission is going to be next year. We'll eventually find out. I would assume that it's win the Coastal and win the ACC championship game. Mm-hmm. And I think if you can win the ACC championship game, that means that you're beating Clemson, and that means you're national. They want to be national. They want to be in the CFP. Mm-hmm. They want to play for a national championship. That is their stated mission down the line. In year 3, that's an awful lot to ask.
Mm-hmm.
because they don't yet have the second wave of guys.
Yeah.
I didn't think they were going to be in A&M because I didn't think that they were good enough in the trenches.
It's enough.
And they weren't. A&M was better. And that's ultimately why A&M won that. Carolina couldn't convert third and won fourth and won.
Mm-hmm.
A&M converted their situation. They won the game. That's kind of what it came down to, right? Notre Dame was a trenches game too. They weren't good enough in the trenches. Well, Notre Dame was in the CFP, and Texas A&M almost made the CFP. So they know where they have to get a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure they'll be there, certainly on the defensive line next year, but they could make a giant step toward being that. So the endgame stated mission is during the course of Mack's time here in his second stint.
Mm-hmm.
Next year's stated mission, I would assume, like I said a minute ago, is probably going to be getting to the ACC championship game, maybe even winning it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's realistic.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
If they don't get there, you can't really project injuries. You can't say, well, gosh, if they miss a few guys, and that kind of clouds your thinking, because that's with a lot of people. I mean, if Trevor Lawrence didn't play it all this season for Clemson, would they have been where they were? We don't know. And it's kind of foolish to think about when it hasn't happened yet.
Exactly.
I think this team should be the favorite in the Coastal, assuming that we have Atlantic and Coastal again.
Yeah, I'm about to say we don't even know that.
And I think with some of the guys that Clemson needs to replace in June, July, and August, I can envision a scenario where Carolina plays them in Charlotte and is very competitive with them.
I can see it too. I just think kind of looking at the Coastal, and I'm basing obviously a lot of, and like I said, we don't know if there's going to be a Coastal and Atlantic game, but basing on the kind of the rest of the conference this year, you kind of look at it and say, well, I mean, you would think Carolina would be the second best team in the league. Obviously, Clemson's way up there, and they're losing Trevor Lawrence, so they're going to have some guys to replace. But that's a program that's well established now. So I think dethroning them in the third year of Mack Brown is maybe a little bit high of an expectation to go into the ACC championship game and win it. But I think when you look at the rest of the conference and the trajectory of where Carolina's at right now and going, especially what we saw towards the end of the year, and we haven't really talked about recruiting. When you add recruiting and how well Carolina's been recruiting over the past few seasons, I mean, I think there's no reason to expect Carolina shouldn't be a lot better. 7-6 the first year, 8-4 this year. Kind of expecting them to lose less games than that this year, and that would be progress for this program as a whole. But there is still a long way to go. We both agree on that.
And on paper, historically, when 20 years people look back and they see the growth of this program, they're going to go 7-6, 8-4. They took a nice step forward. They took a huge step forward.
It was huge, yeah.
I mean, they took a huge step forward. I think what they learned about themselves, all that trajectory stuff that we're talking about, I think it was a much bigger step forward than 8-4 suggests. And those two losses earlier, I still submit that those long-term help the staff, help the players. They, if you're going to lose a game, get value out of it.
Exactly.
Get something out of it. And I think that this program did that. So, if they're 8-4 next year, then I think that would be a step back. That wouldn't show the kind of growth that we expect the program to show. We don't really know what the schedule is going to look like because I think the staff, I think Mack will do everything in his power to maybe swap out one of those non-conference games, because if you think you could be a CFP team, well, that non-conference schedule, other than trip to Notre Dame, ain't going to do it.
No, it's not.
You've got to be. They're going to be judged. They don't have the Ohio State brand that got them in with 6 games this year. Okay, they don't have the Clemson or Alabama brand or anything like that, or Oklahoma brand. They get in a lot too. They're going to have to really put together a nice resume, and the ACC Coastal is what it is. And of course, NC State can be pretty good next year, so that's one good team that they'll have on the schedule. But they got to go to Raleigh. So I think they need to go out and find a different opponent, play one of those Chick-fil-A games down there in Atlanta, get someone from the SEC to come over and play. They won't get Auburn because they got new staff. No new coach's right mind's going to want to open up with Carolina down there. But, maybe Florida's available, maybe Tennessee's available, somebody from that league. So you could say, okay, here's what we did against them. And here's what another team that we contending for a CFP spot with did against that team. And that's kind of thinking big too. You want to think big for the program. If your stated mission is what it is, well, swap out Georgia State and go play somebody in Atlanta in one of those neutral site made for TV games.
Yeah, I think the fact that we're even having a conversation about Carolina, being an ACC championship, at least being in that game, a favorite for that, and maybe even a top 4, maybe even having a decent shot at getting there, kind of shows just how good of a job Mack Brown's done since he came in just over 2 years. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, I still think CFP is a tall order. I mean,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
A&M didn't
I
get
don't
in.
really expect that next
And
year.
look at the kind of season they had. But I think the fact that it's a discussion point,
It says a lot.
and it's not one of those goals that is on the other side of the globe.
Mm-hmm.
It's
No,
not
it's
like
not.
you're trying to get to. It's not like you're trying to get to Auckland, New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
they can see that a little clearer now than they could 6 months ago.
Oh yeah.
And that means that they've had a lot of progress. So how much closer do they get over the next 12 months will be very interesting to see, because it'll be last year Sam.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a scenario where he would come back for a fourth year. So what do they get out of the Sam Howell era? That'll be very interesting too. And one other thing is, I do think Sam will start the season as one of the top two, one of the top three contenders for the Heisman, and they'll push him for the Heisman. They actually put out a tweet right after Devontae Smith won the Heisman for Alabama. They put out a tweet about 12 months from now, Sam.
Yeah.
So, and I actually had a story that we ran about Sam and the Heisman, and I'm not going to make this a Heisman Trophy podcast, but his numbers going into what could be his Heisman campaign are really good when you compare them to past winners.
Oh yeah. 100%. Yeah, it's like I said, man, it's from us. It's intriguing to see what this team can do going into next year and what they end up doing next year. And then, like we've said in really all the podcasts, I think if you're a Carolina football fan, I mean, you got to be really excited and really optimistic about what this program can do and the job that Mack Brown's been able to do. And like I said, it feels like it's been longer than just over 2 years, but it really hasn't been that long since he's been here. So, I mean, credit to him, credit to the staff and what they've been able to do. And when you look at how good they're recruiting, which you and Dina have talked about in so many podcasts, I mean, it goes without saying, it's not really a surprise that this program's at where it is right now. But hey, just go ahead and wrap this thing up, man. Let's put a nice little bow on the final episode of the 4-part series we did on the Carolina football program. Hope you guys have enjoyed it overall. And like I said earlier in the video, if you haven't seen them, click on our channel below and you'll find them up towards the top of our channel in terms of the other 3 podcasts that we did on the program. So AJ, thanks for joining me for all these, man. Really enjoyed talking to you and kind of breaking down the program and looking back a little bit and looking forward a little bit. But yeah, I think it's a really exciting time for the Carolina football program as a whole. And it's a fun program to cover. It's been enjoyable. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. What, you better say something, AJ?
No, I agree 100%. Look, we've had all different kinds of teams I've covered in my career.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool to cover something that continues to take those steps. I've covered a lot of promises, a lot of stated missions that were not accomplished. And right now they're on track.
Yeah, they're definitely on track. Yeah. Exciting times, man. Exciting times. And like I said, it's fun to cover. So as always, guys, if you've enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Tar Heel Illustrated. We'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.